The autumn rain pelted against the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Catherine, Princess of Wales, carefully placed the Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara back into its velvet-lined case. The diamonds caught the lamplight one last time before disappearing into darkness as she closed the lid. She had worn the precious piece to the state dinner just hours before, and now the weight of more than just jewels pressed down upon her shoulders. Catherine had always understood that being part of the royal family meant sharing traditions, heirlooms, and responsibilities. The tiara she had just removed was one of Princess Diana's favorites, and wearing it always made her feel connected to William's mother in a way that brought both comfort and responsibility. Diana's memory lived on through these precious pieces, and Catherine treasured every opportunity to honor that legacy. The soft knock on her private dressing room door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting to see William or perhaps one of her ladies-in-waiting. Instead, Camilla, the queen consort, stepped into the room with a purposeful stride that immediately put Catherine on alert. "Catherine, dear, I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Camilla said, though her tone suggested this was not really a request. "I wanted to speak with you about something rather important while the evening is still fresh in our minds." Catherine turned from her dressing table, smoothing down her silk robe. "Of course, Camilla. How can I help you?" Camilla's eyes went directly to the tiara case, and Catherine felt an uncomfortable chill run down her spine. "The dinner tonight was absolutely magnificent, wasn't it? You looked stunning, as always. That tiara particularly suited you." "Thank you," Catherine replied carefully. "It's such an honor to wear pieces with so much history and meaning." "Yes, well, that's actually what I wanted to discuss," Camilla continued, moving closer to where Catherine stood. "Charles and I have been talking about the upcoming state visit from the Swedish royal family next month. It's going to be quite the affair, and we want everything to be absolutely perfect." Catherine nodded, unsure where this conversation was heading but sensing an undercurrent she didn't like. "I'm sure it will be wonderful. The Swedish royals are always so gracious." "Indeed they are," Camilla agreed, her fingers now tracing the edge of Catherine's dressing table. "Which is why we need to ensure that every detail reflects the proper hierarchy and respect for protocol. The queen consort should, naturally, wear the most significant pieces for such occasions." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Catherine felt her stomach tighten as she began to understand what Camilla was suggesting. "I'm not sure I follow," she said, though she was beginning to fear that she understood perfectly. Camilla's smile was thin and calculated. "The Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara, Catherine. It would be more appropriate for me to wear it to the Swedish state dinner. After all, I am the queen consort now, and such significant pieces should reflect the current hierarchy of the royal family." Catherine felt as though the air had been knocked out of her lungs. The tiara wasn't just jewelry to her, it was a connection to Diana, a piece of history that William had specifically wanted her to wear. More than that, it had been part of their wedding day preparations, part of their most precious memories, and a symbol of her place in the family that she had earned through years of dedication and service. "Camilla, that tiara has special significance," Catherine began, trying to keep her voice steady despite the anger beginning to build inside her chest. "William and it's been part of our family traditions. It was his mother's favorite." "Oh, my dear, I understand sentimentality," Camilla replied dismissively, waving her hand as if brushing away Catherine's concerns. "But we must think about what's proper now. Diana was the Princess of Wales, but I am the queen consort. The hierarchy has changed, and our jewelry choices should reflect that reality." Catherine's hands clenched into fists at her sides. How dare Camilla speak about Diana so casually, as if her memory and legacy were simply inconveniences to be swept aside for political convenience? The audacity of demanding William's mother's favorite tiara while dismissing the emotional significance made Catherine's blood boil. "I don't think that's how these things work," Catherine said, her voice growing firmer. "These pieces have been designated for specific members of the family. The Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara has been part of my collection for years now." Camilla's expression hardened slightly, though she maintained her superficial smile. "Catherine, dear, you must understand that being part of this family means making sacrifices for the greater good. Sometimes we must put personal attachments aside for the sake of protocol and the monarchy's image." "Personal attachments?" Catherine repeated, incredulous. "This isn't about personal attachment, Camilla. This is about respect for family traditions and the wishes of previous generations. Diana wore that tiara with pride, and William wanted me to continue that legacy. William is not the king, Camilla reminded her sharply. Charles is, and, as his wife, I have certain privileges and responsibilities that supersede sentimental considerations. Catherine felt her composure beginning to crack. Years of training in royal protocol, years of biting her tongue and maintaining dignity in difficult situations, were being tested like never before. She had faced plenty of challenges in her role as Princess of Wales, but nothing had prepared her for this level of calculated cruelty from someone within her own family. I cannot believe you're asking me to give up something so meaningful, Catherine said, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion. That tiara represents more than just rank or hierarchy. It represents love, memory, and continuity. Diana would be heartbroken to know her favorite piece was being used as a tool for power games. Camilla's mask slipped further, revealing the steel underneath. Diana is gone, Catherine. This family has moved on, and it's time you accepted the new reality. I am the queen consort, and I will wear the appropriate pieces for state occasions. It's not a request. The casual dismissal of Diana's memory was the final straw. Catherine felt tears of rage burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of Camilla. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and looked directly into the older woman's eyes with an intensity that made Camilla take a small step backward. No, Catherine said quietly but with absolute certainty. I will not hand over that tiara. Not now, not ever. It was entrusted to me, and I will honor that trust. Camilla's face flushed with anger at being denied so directly. You're making a mistake, Catherine. This family operates on respect for hierarchy and tradition. If you cannot understand your place in that hierarchy, perhaps you need to reconsider whether you truly belong here. The threat was clear, and Catherine felt her heart racing with a mixture of fear and fury. Was Camilla actually suggesting that her marriage, her children's future, her entire life could be threatened over a tiara? The absurdity and cruelty of it left Catherine speechless for a moment. Are you threatening me? Catherine asked, her voice dangerously low. I'm simply explaining reality, Camilla replied coolly. Actions have consequences, and defiance has costs. Think carefully about what's more important to you, a piece of jewelry or your position in this family. Catherine stared at Camilla for a long moment, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time the calculating politician beneath the grandmother facade. This wasn't about protocol or hierarchy, it was about power and control. Camilla was testing her, seeing how far she could push William's wife, how much of Diana's legacy she could erase or claim for herself. Get out of my room, Catherine said quietly but with unmistakable authority. Get out now. Camilla's eyebrows rose in surprise. She clearly hadn't expected such direct resistance. Catherine, I think you're being rather dramatic about this whole thing. Perhaps when you've had time to think rationally, get out, Catherine repeated, louder this time. This conversation is over. For a moment, the two women stared at each other across the elegant dressing room, the tension crackling between them like electricity. Finally, Camilla gathered her composure and moved toward the door, but not before delivering one final blow. I hope you'll reconsider your position before the Swedish visit, she said with false sweetness. It would be such a shame if this disagreement affected the children's relationships with their grandfather. Family harmony is so important, don't you think? With that parting shot, Camilla left the room, closing the door behind her with deliberate gentleness that somehow felt more threatening than if she had slammed it. Catherine stood alone in her dressing room, trembling with rage and disbelief. The beautiful space that had always been her sanctuary now felt contaminated by Camilla's presence and threats. She looked at the tiara case sitting innocently on her dressing table, and her heart broke thinking about what Diana would say if she knew her precious tiara had become a weapon in a family war. Moving to her window, Catherine looked out at the London skyline and tried to calm her racing heart. Where was William? He was probably still downstairs with the other men, enjoying brandy and cigars, completely unaware that his stepmother had just declared war on his wife. How could she even begin to explain what had just happened? How could she make him understand the cruelty and calculated nature of Camilla's demand without sounding petty or vindictive herself? Catherine pressed her forehead against the cool glass and closed her eyes. In all her years of preparation for royal life, no one had taught her how to handle being bullied by the queen consort. No protocol manual covered what to do when family members used children as leverage in jewelry disputes. No training had prepared her for the moment when honoring Diana's memory would put her own family at risk. The tears finally came, hot and angry, streaming down her cheeks as she realized that this was only the beginning. If Camilla was willing to go this far over a tiara, what other battles lay ahead? What other pieces of Diana's legacy would she try to claim? What other ways would she find to remind Catherine that the hierarchy had changed, that Diana's son's wife was now just an obstacle to be managed? Catherine wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. She had faced challenges before: the intense media scrutiny, the constant public pressure, the weight of representing an entire institution. She had learned to navigate complex royal protocols, to balance personal desires with public duty, to maintain grace under impossible circumstances. But this felt different. This felt personal in a way that cut deeper than any tabloid headline or protocol misstep ever could. As she heard footsteps in the hallway outside, Catherine quickly composed herself. Whether it was William returning or a staff member, she needed to appear calm and collected. But, inside, her mind was racing with plans and possibilities. She would not surrender Diana's tiara without a fight, but she also couldn't risk her children's relationship with their grandfather or create a scandal that would damage the monarchy. The door opened, and William stepped inside, his face immediately showing concern at her expression despite her attempts to hide her distress. "Catherine? What's wrong? You look as though you've seen a ghost." She turned from the window to face her husband, the man who had given her this life of privilege and responsibility, the man who trusted her to honor his mother's memory, the man who now needed to know that his family was under attack from within. "William," she said softly, "we need to talk." William's expression shifted from concern to alarm as he saw the distress his wife was trying so hard to conceal. He quickly closed the door behind him and moved to where Catherine stood by the window, his hands automatically reaching for her shoulders in the protective gesture that had become second nature over their years together. "What's happened?" he asked gently but urgently. "You're shaking." Catherine looked into his blue eyes, so much like his mother's, and felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crumble again. How could she explain what had just transpired without sounding like she was creating drama over something that others might consider trivial? How could she make him understand that this wasn't really about jewelry at all, but about respect, memory, and the very foundation of their family's values? "Camilla was just here," she began, her voice still unsteady despite her efforts to remain calm. "She wants me to give her the Cambridge Lovers' Knot tiara for the Swedish state dinner next month." William's face went very still, and Catherine could see him processing not just her words but the way she was saying them, the tension in her body, the traces of tears she hadn't quite managed to hide. "She asked you to give her my mother's tiara?" "She didn't ask, William. She demanded it. She said it was more appropriate for the queen consort to wear the most significant pieces, and that I needed to understand the hierarchy." Catherine's voice grew stronger as she continued, the indignation flooding back. "She dismissed everything that tiara means to us, to your mother's memory, as if it were just sentimentality getting in the way of protocol." William's hands dropped from her shoulders, and she watched his expression transform from concern to something much darker. The Prince of Wales had inherited many things from his mother: her compassion, her dedication to service, her ability to connect with people from all walks of life. But he had also inherited her fierce protectiveness when it came to family, and Catherine could see that protective instinct awakening now. "Tell me exactly what she said," William requested, his voice taking on the controlled tone he used when he was fighting to contain powerful emotions. "Every word you can remember." Catherine took a deep breath and recounted the entire conversation, watching William's face grow progressively more thunderous with each detail. When she reached the part about Camilla's threats regarding the children's relationship with Charles, William turned abruptly away from her and began pacing across the room. "She threatened our children's relationship with their grandfather over a tiara?" he asked incredulously. "She actually used George, Charlotte, and Louis as leverage?" "She said family harmony was important and implied that my defiance could affect their relationships," Catherine confirmed. "William, it wasn't really about the tiara at all. It was about power, about making sure I know my place in her version of the royal hierarchy." William stopped pacing and turned to face her, his blue eyes blazing with an anger Catherine had rarely seen in their years together. "My place? Your place? Catherine, you are the Princess of Wales. You are my wife and the mother of the future king. You have earned your position through years of dedicated service and unwavering commitment to this country and this family. No one has the right to make you feel otherwise." The vehemence in his voice both comforted and worried Catherine. She had needed him to understand, needed him to share her outrage, but she also knew that his anger could have far-reaching consequences for the entire royal family. "What are we going to do?" she asked softly. William resumed his pacing, running his hands through his hair in a gesture Catherine recognized as a sign that he was thinking furiously. "What we're going to do is make it very clear that this behavior is unacceptable. That tiara was my mother's favorite. She wore it with pride and joy, and she would have wanted you to continue wearing it. More importantly, you have worn it with grace and dignity, honoring both her memory and the traditions of this family. But, William, if we fight this too hard, what if it does affect the children's relationship with your father? What if Camilla finds other ways to make our lives difficult? She's the queen consort now, she has influence and power that she clearly isn't afraid to use." William stopped pacing and came to stand directly in front of his wife, taking her hands in his. "Catherine, listen to me very carefully. My father may be the king, and Camilla may be his queen, but that does not give them the right to bully us or to threaten our children. If we allow this to happen, if we give in to this kind of manipulation, it will only be the beginning. Today it's a tiara, tomorrow it might be state visit protocols, next year it could be decisions about our children's education or roles." Catherine squeezed his hands, drawing strength from his conviction even as she worried about the battle they seemed to be heading toward. "I just don't want to cause problems for the family or the monarchy. You know how the press will react if there are any signs of discord. The monarchy's strength comes from its values and traditions, not from appeasing bullies," William said firmly. "My mother understood that, and it's a lesson I learned well. We will not dishonor her memory by allowing someone to use her possessions as tools for petty power games." As they stood together in the soft lamplight of Catherine's dressing room, both of them lost in thought about the implications of the evening's events, another knock came at the door. This time, it was softer and accompanied by a familiar voice. "Papa? Mama? Are you in there?" Catherine and William exchanged glances. It was Charlotte, their daughter, who should have been asleep hours ago but had clearly escaped from her nanny once again. William moved to open the door, and their 7-year-old daughter appeared in the doorway wearing her favorite pink pajamas and a concerned expression. "Why are you both still awake?" Charlotte asked with the directness that made her so much like her grandmother Diana. "I heard voices, and Mama sounded upset." Catherine's heart clenched as she realized that even their attempts to keep family conflicts private were failing. Charlotte was perceptive beyond her years, and the idea that their daughter was picking up on adult tensions made the entire situation feel even more serious. "Come here, sweetheart," Catherine called, opening her arms to her daughter. Charlotte ran to her and climbed onto her lap, immediately wrapping her small arms around her mother's neck in a fierce hug. "Did someone make you sad, Mama?" Charlotte whispered into Catherine's ear. William came to sit beside them on the small settee, placing a gentle hand on his daughter's back. "Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, Princess, but that doesn't mean anything bad will happen to our family." Charlotte pulled back to look at both her parents with serious eyes. "Was it about Grandpa Charles? Because he seemed different at dinner tonight." "Not mean, just worried about something." Catherine and William exchanged another look over their daughter's head. If Charlotte had noticed tension at the dinner, how many other people had picked up on undercurrents in the family? The royal family lived under constant scrutiny, and any signs of discord could quickly become public scandals. "No, sweetheart, it wasn't about Grandpa Charles," Catherine said carefully. "Just some grown-up things that Mama and Papa need to work out." "Is it about the pretty crown you wore tonight?" Charlotte asked unexpectedly. "I saw you talking to Granny Camilla about it when I was getting my drink of water." Catherine felt her blood run cold. If Charlotte had witnessed part of the conversation, how much had she seen or heard? The innocent question revealed that their daughter had been exposed to at least some of the conflict, which made Catherine feel sick to her stomach. "You saw Mama and Granny Camilla talking?" William asked gently, though Catherine could hear the underlying tension in his voice. "Just a little bit. Granny Camilla looked like she wanted something, and Mama looked like she didn't want to give it to her. Like when Louis wants my toys," Charlotte explained with the simple honesty of childhood. William's jaw tightened visibly, but he kept his voice calm and reassuring. "Sometimes adults disagree about things, just like children do. The important thing is that we work things out with kindness and respect." "But Mama still looks sad," Charlotte observed, reaching up to touch Catherine's face. "Your eyes look like when you cry." Catherine's heart broke a little more at her daughter's perception and concern. This beautiful, innocent child should not be worried about adult conflicts or trying to comfort her mother over royal family politics. The fact that Charlotte was picking up on these tensions made Catherine even more determined to protect her children from the ugliness of the situation. "Mama is just tired, sweetheart," Catherine said, forcing a smile. "It's been a long evening, and sometimes grown-ups need extra hugs when they're tired." Charlotte hugged her mother tightly again, and Catherine breathed in the familiar scent of her daughter's shampoo, letting the simple comfort of holding her child calm some of her anger and anxiety. "Can I sleep in your bed tonight?" Charlotte asked hopefully. "I promise I won't kick or steal all the covers." William chuckled despite the tension of the evening. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Why don't you go get your special blanket while Mama and I finish talking?" Charlotte scrambled down from Catherine's lap and ran toward the door, then paused and turned back. "Papa? Will you make sure no one takes Mama's pretty crown?" It made her look like a real princess tonight. The innocent question hit William like a physical blow. His daughter, without understanding the adult complexities involved, had identified exactly what was at stake, not just a tiara, but Catherine's dignity and position as a real princess in the family hierarchy. "Yes, princess," William said solemnly. "I will make sure no one takes anything that belongs to Mama." After Charlotte left to retrieve her blanket, William and Catherine sat in silence for a moment, both processing how their daughter's brief presence had added new dimensions to their situation. They weren't just fighting for principles or family traditions anymore, they were fighting for the kind of family they wanted their children to grow up in. She saw it, Catherine said quietly. Even at 7 years old, she could see what Camilla was doing. "Which means others will see it too," William replied grimly. "The staff, other family members, possibly even the press if word gets out. Camilla may think she's asserting her authority, but what she's really doing is showing everyone that she's willing to bully and manipulate to get what she wants. So what do we do tomorrow? What do we do when she inevitably brings this up again, probably with Charles this time?" William was quiet for a long moment, and Catherine could practically see him weighing options and consequences in his mind. Finally, he spoke with a determination that reminded her exactly why she had fallen in love with this man who carried such enormous responsibilities with grace. "Tomorrow, we make it clear that this ends here. That tiara was my mother's, it is now yours, and it will remain yours. If Camilla wants to wear significant jewelry to state occasions, she has access to plenty of other historic pieces. But she will not take something that carries such personal meaning for our family. And if your father sides with her? Then, we will deal with that when it happens. But, Catherine, I want you to understand something very clearly, you are not alone in this. You will never be alone in this. That tiara represents more than just my mother's memory. It represents the values she stood for, the dignity she maintained under pressure, and the love she had for this family. I will not let anyone diminish that legacy or make you feel like you're not worthy of carrying it forward." Charlotte's voice could be heard in the hallway, chattering to her nanny about sleeping in Mama and Papa's room, and both William and Catherine smiled despite the gravity of their situation. "Our children should never have to see us fight battles like this," Catherine said softly. "No, they shouldn't," William agreed. "Which is exactly why we're going to fight it properly, with dignity and strength, and make sure it never happens again." The next morning dawned gray and drizzling, matching William's mood as he made his way through the corridors of Buckingham Palace. He had requested a private meeting with his father, and Charles had agreed to see him in the king's study before the day's official appointments began. William carried himself with the controlled determination of a man who had spent the night planning for a battle he had never wanted to fight. Charles looked up from his morning correspondence as William entered the mahogany-paneled study. The king's expression was pleasant but slightly puzzled, as though he couldn't imagine what urgent matter required such an early meeting. "Good morning, William. You look rather serious for such an early hour. I trust Catherine and the children are well." "Good morning, Father," William replied, remaining standing rather than taking the offered seat. "Catherine and the children are fine, though we had a rather disturbing conversation last evening that I believe you should be aware of." Charles set down his fountain pen and gave his son his full attention. "Oh? What sort of conversation?" William had rehearsed this moment during his sleepless night, considering various approaches and their potential consequences. He had decided on directness. His father respected straightforward communication, even when the topics were uncomfortable. Camilla visited Catherine's private quarters last evening after the state dinner. She demanded that Catherine hand over the Cambridge lovers not tiara for the upcoming Swedish state visit, claiming it was more appropriate for the Queen Consort to wear such significant pieces. Charles's face went through several rapid changes of expression: surprise, confusion, and, then, something that looked like resignation. "Ah," he said simply, which was not at all the response William had been expecting. "Ah?" William repeated, his carefully controlled tone sharpening. "Father, she threatened Catherine's position in this family and implied that our children's relationship with you might suffer if Catherine didn't comply. This is far beyond a simple disagreement about jewelry." Charles rubbed his temples with the gesture of a man who had been dealing with difficult personalities for far too long. "William, I understand you're upset, and perhaps Camilla could have handled this more diplomatically, but you must understand the position she's in as Queen Consort. These matters of precedence and protocol can be quite complex." William stared at his father in disbelief. "Complex?" "Father, she bullied my wife in her own private quarters and threatened our children over a tiara that has been part of Catherine's collection for years." "There's nothing complex about that, it's simply wrong. Now, William, I'm sure Camilla didn't intend any threats toward the children." "She's quite fond of George, Charlotte, and Louis," Charles said in the placating tone that William remembered from childhood disagreements. Perhaps there was simply a misunderstanding about her intentions. The response hit William like a slap. His father was making excuses for Camilla's behavior while dismissing Catherine's legitimate concerns. This was not the father who had raised him to stand up for what was right, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, to maintain the dignity and values of the monarchy. "There was no misunderstanding," William said, his voice growing colder. "Catherine is not prone to hysterics or misinterpreting conversations. Camilla was clear in her demands and equally clear in her threats. She told Catherine to think carefully about what was more important, a piece of jewelry or her position in this family." Charles shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and, for the first time, William saw something that looked like guilt flash across his father's features. Perhaps Camilla was simply trying to ensure proper protocol for such an important state visit. The Swedish royals are particular about these matters of precedence. "This has nothing to do with the Swedish royals, and you know it," William shot back. "This is about Camilla asserting dominance over my wife and trying to erase my mother's memory in the process. That tiara was my mother's favorite, father. She wore it with joy and pride, and she would be heartbroken to know it was being used as a weapon in petty power games." The mention of Diana clearly struck a nerve. Charles's face tightened, and he looked away from his son toward the rain-streaked windows. Your mother is gone, William. We cannot make decisions based on what we think she might have wanted. We must consider the current needs of the monarchy." William felt something break inside his chest at his father's words. "The current needs of the monarchy? Is that what you call allowing your wife to bully mine? Is that what you call using children as pawns in jewelry disputes? Because if those are the current needs of the monarchy, then, perhaps we need to reconsider what kind of institution we're trying to preserve." Charles stood up abruptly, his own temper finally beginning to show. "That is quite enough, William. I understand you're protective of Catherine, and that's admirable, but you cannot speak to me in that tone about the monarchy or about my wife." "Your wife," William repeated, and the pain in his voice was unmistakable. "Yes, she is your wife, and I have accepted that. I have been respectful and welcoming, despite everything. But she is not my mother, father, and she has no right to claim my mother's legacy or to threaten my family in pursuit of her own agenda." The two men faced each other across the elegant study, king and heir, father and son, with years of complicated history and competing loyalties stretching between them. William could see the conflict in his father's eyes, the desire to support his son warring with the need to protect his wife and maintain peace in his marriage. "What exactly are you asking of me, William?" Charles asked finally, his voice sounding older and more tired than it had moments before. "I'm asking you to speak to your wife and make it clear that her behavior toward Catherine is unacceptable. I'm asking you to confirm that the Cambridge lovers not tiara remains part of Catherine's collection, as it has been for years. And I'm asking you to ensure that our children are never again used as leverage in adult disagreements." Charles was quiet for a long moment, and William held his breath, hoping to see some sign that his father understood the gravity of the situation and was prepared to do the right thing. "The tiara question is complicated," Charles said finally. "There are many historic pieces, and decisions about who wears what must consider the overall image of the monarchy at important events. William's heart sank as he realized his father was not going to take a strong stand. "Father, this isn't about the overall image of the monarchy. This is about basic respect and decency within our family. If you cannot see that, then we have a much bigger problem than I realized." Before Charles could respond, there was a soft knock at the study door. "Come," Charles called, and his private secretary appeared with an apologetic expression. "Your Majesty, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but you have the Commonwealth Minister's briefing in 10 minutes, and they're quite insistent about reviewing the agenda beforehand." Charles nodded dismissively, clearly grateful for the interruption. "Of course. William, we'll have to continue this conversation another time. I have obligations to attend to." William stared at his father in amazement. "Obligations? Father, your son is telling you that his wife was threatened and bullied in her own home, and you're worried about a briefing schedule?" "William, please," Charles said wearily. "These dramatic interpretations help no one. I'm sure we can sort this all out sensibly when emotions aren't running quite so high." The dismissal was clear, and William felt a cold fury settle over him that was somehow worse than the hot anger of the previous evening. His father was choosing to minimize and ignore the situation rather than address it directly. "Very well, Father," William said with icy politeness. "But understand this, Catherine will not be giving up that tiara, and if there are consequences for that decision, they will fall on all of us, not just my family." Charles looked up sharply at the implied threat, but William was already moving toward the door. "William, wait. I didn't say you didn't say anything, Father." "That's exactly the problem." William left his father's study feeling more alone and angrier than he had since his mother's death. As he walked through the palace corridors, past portraits of ancestors who had faced their own family crises and political challenges, he wondered how many of them had been forced to choose between loyalty to their parents and protection of their spouses and children. His phone buzzed with a text message from Catherine. How did it go? William stopped walking and leaned against one of the tall windows overlooking the palace gardens. How could he tell his wife that his father had essentially chosen Camilla's comfort over Catherine's dignity? How could he explain that the King of England was apparently willing to sacrifice family harmony to avoid confronting his wife's problematic behavior? Instead of answering the text immediately, William called his private secretary and requested a meeting with the palace's senior staff, the people who actually managed royal protocol and jewelry collections. If his father wouldn't provide clarity on this issue, William would seek it elsewhere. As he waited for his secretary to arrange the meetings, William's thoughts turned to his children. George would one day inherit all of this, the crown, the responsibilities, and, apparently, the family dysfunction that came with it. What kind of monarchy would they be passing on to the next generation if they couldn't even handle basic issues of respect and fairness among themselves? His phone rang, interrupting his dark thoughts. It was Catherine, and he could hear the anxiety in her voice even before she spoke. "William? I just had the most extraordinary conversation with your father's equerry. He called to inquire about the tiara collection and whether there might be any adjustments needed for upcoming state occasions. He was trying to be diplomatic, but the message was clear: someone has asked him to explore the possibility of transferring pieces." William's grip tightened on his phone. "They're going around us. Camilla couldn't get what she wanted through direct confrontation, so now she's using official channels to pressure you. What do we do? If they make this an official palace protocol issue rather than a family matter, it becomes much harder to resist. They'll claim it's about proper procedure rather than personal conflicts." William looked out at the grey London sky and made a decision that would have consequences far beyond a single tiara. "We fight it, Catherine. Publicly if necessary. Because this isn't really about jewelry anymore, it's about what kind of family we are and what kind of institution we want to represent." "Publicly? William, are you sure? The media attention will be intense, and you know how they love stories about royal family conflicts." "I'm sure," William said firmly. "My mother never backed down when people tried to diminish her role or her dignity, and neither will we. We'll do this properly, through the right channels, with the right support, but we will not be bullied into submission." As he ended the call and prepared to return to Kensington Palace, William realized that the events of the past 24 hours had fundamentally changed his relationship with his father and his understanding of his own position in the royal hierarchy. He was no longer just the dutiful son and heir apparent, he was now the protector of his own family's interests and dignity, even when that meant standing against the king himself. The battle lines had been drawn, and William was no longer interested in finding a diplomatic middle ground. Some principles were worth fighting for, regardless of the personal cost. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation, and the atmosphere within the royal family had grown increasingly tense. What had begun as a private dispute over a tiara had evolved into something much larger and more dangerous for the monarchy. William had spent those weeks methodically building his case, consulting with constitutional experts, reviewing historical precedents, and, most importantly, documenting every attempt by Camilla and her allies to pressure Catherine into surrendering the Cambridge lovers, not Tiara. The pressure campaign had been relentless and sophisticated. Palace staff members had been instructed to casually mention protocol concerns about jewelry assignments. Longtime courtiers had been enlisted to share helpful observations about appropriate hierarchy displays at state functions. Even some members of the extended royal family had been convinced to express gentle concerns about maintaining proper precedent standards. Catherine had weathered it all with remarkable grace, but William could see the toll it was taking on his wife. She had grown quieter, more watchful, constantly analyzing every interaction for signs of the next attack. The woman who had once moved through royal obligations with natural confidence now second-guessed herself at every turn, wondering whether her choice of jewelry, her seating arrangements, or even her participation in certain events would be seen as defiant or inappropriate. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when William received an urgent call from Catherine while he was attending a veterans' charity event in Birmingham. Her voice was shaking with a combination of anger and disbelief that immediately put him on high alert. "William, you need to come home immediately," she said without preamble. "They've gone after Charlotte." William's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, they've gone after Charlotte?" The palace education coordinator called this morning. "Apparently, there have been concerns raised about Charlotte's understanding of royal protocol and hierarchy. They want to arrange special tutoring sessions to help her better understand her place in the family structure and the importance of respecting the authority of senior royals." William had to sit down in his car, feeling physically ill at the implications. "They're targeting our 7-year-old daughter because we won't surrender a tiara?" "It gets worse," Catherine continued, her voice growing stronger with fury. The coordinator mentioned that these concerns were raised after Charlotte made some inappropriate comments about family jewelry during a recent palace visit. "Someone has been watching our daughter, William. Someone has been monitoring her conversations and reporting back." The betrayal hit William like a physical blow. The idea that his own family, people who claimed to love his children, were spying on a 7-year-old and using her innocent words as ammunition in an adult power struggle was beyond his capacity to forgive or understand. "Where are you now?" he asked, already signaling to his protection team that they needed to leave immediately. "At home with the children. I've told their nanny that no one from the palace education department is to have any contact with them without our direct approval." "William, I'm scared. If they're willing to go this far, what else might they do?" "I'm coming home right now," William said grimly. "And, Catherine? This ends today." "I don't care what the consequences are, this ends today." The drive back to London gave William time to think, and, by the time he reached Kensington Palace, his mind was crystal clear about what needed to be done. He found Catherine in their private sitting room, pacing like a caged lioness while the children played upstairs under the watchful eye of their trusted nanny. "Tell me everything," he said without preamble. Catherine recounted the phone conversation in detail, and, with each word, William's resolve hardened further. When she finished, he pulled out his phone and began making calls. "What are you doing?" Catherine asked. "I'm calling our private secretary, the palace press office, and our legal advisors. We're going to end this properly, but we're also going to make sure it never happens again. William, if we go public with this, it will create a constitutional crisis. The media will have a field day with stories about royal family infighting." William looked at his wife with an expression she had never seen before, cold, determined, and utterly uncompromising. "Catherine, they threatened our daughter's education and well-being over a piece of jewelry. They have been spying on our children and using their innocent words as weapons. At this point, I don't particularly care about constitutional crises or media coverage." Over the next several hours, William orchestrated a response that was both surgical and devastating. He requested immediate meetings with the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Prime Minister's private secretary, and the heads of several Commonwealth governments. Most importantly, he arranged for a private meeting with his grandmother's former private secretary, a woman who had witnessed decades of royal family conflicts and whose opinion carried enormous weight within palace circles. The message William sent through these channels was simple and unambiguous. The current situation was damaging the monarchy's reputation and undermining public confidence in the royal family's ability to manage its own affairs. More critically, the targeting of minor children in adult political disputes was crossing a line that could not be tolerated. By evening, the pressure on Charles to intervene had become overwhelming. The king found himself facing a choice between supporting his son and daughter-in-law or defending his wife's increasingly indefensible behavior. The final confrontation took place in Charles's private office at Clarence House. William arrived to find not only his father but also Camilla waiting for him, her expression tight with barely contained anger. "William," Charles began carefully, "I understand there have been some misunderstandings about protocol matters, and perhaps some communications that could have been handled more sensitively." "Misunderstandings?" William repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Father, your wife has spent 3 weeks orchestrating a campaign to humiliate my wife and intimidate my children. This morning, she arranged for palace staff to threaten my daughter's education because a 7-year-old made innocent comments about jewelry." "There are no misunderstandings here, only choices." Camilla finally spoke, her voice sharp with defensive anger. "I have done nothing inappropriate. I simply wanted to ensure proper protocol for state occasions, and I asked for reasonable adjustments to jewelry assignments." If Catherine chose to interpret that as some sort of attack, "Stop," William said, the single word carrying such authority that Camilla actually took a step backward. "Do not speak my wife's name. Do not pretend this was about protocol. And do not ever again involve my children in your political games." The room fell silent, and William could see his father wrestling with the impossible position he had allowed himself to be placed in. Finally, Charles spoke with the weariness of a man who had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about his wife's behavior. "What do you want, William?" "I want a formal statement from the palace confirming that the Cambridge Lovers' Knot tiara remains part of Catherine's jewelry collection, with no restrictions on when or how she chooses to wear it. I want written assurance that no member of our staff will be instructed to pressure or monitor our family regarding any personal matters. And I want an immediate end to any attempts to involve our children in adult disagreements." "And if we agree to these terms?" Charles asked. "Then, this matter ends here and remains private," William replied. "But if there are any future attempts to target my wife or children, I will not hesitate to make this entire situation public, regardless of the consequences for the monarchy." Camilla's face had grown progressively redder during this exchange. "You cannot threaten the king. You cannot make demands about palace protocol." "I am the queen consort, you are my father's wife," William interrupted coldly. "Nothing more, nothing less. You have no authority over my family, no claim to my mother's legacy, and no right to use children as pawns in your personal ambitions." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Camilla looked at Charles, clearly expecting him to defend her, but the king remained silent, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. "Father," William said more gently, "I have always respected your choice to marry Camilla. I have welcomed her into our family and supported her role as queen consort. But I will not allow her to destroy the bonds of trust and affection that should exist between us. The choice is yours." Charles looked between his son and his wife, and William could see the moment when his father finally understood that he could no longer avoid making a difficult decision. The silence stretched on until it became almost unbearable. "The tiara will remain with Catherine," Charles said finally. "There will be no further discussions about jewelry reassignments, and no staff members will be involved in any personal family matters without explicit approval from the principals involved." Camilla's gasp of outrage was audible. "Charles, you cannot be serious." "I am your wife and William is my son," Charles replied with finality. "This matter is closed." William nodded once, crisply. "Thank you, Father. I hope we can put this behind us and focus on our shared commitment to serving the country and the Commonwealth." As William left Clarence House that evening, he reflected on how much had changed in just 3 weeks. The naive belief that family ties would automatically protect his wife and children from political manipulation had been shattered. He had learned that even within the royal family, power respected only strength and determination. Catherine was waiting for him when he arrived home, and the relief in her eyes when he recounted the conversation was palpable. But William also saw something else there, a new wariness, a recognition that their position in the family hierarchy would always require active defense. "It's over?" she asked softly. "This particular battle is over," William replied carefully. But, Catherine, I think we both understand now that we can never again assume that family loyalty will protect us from political ambition. That night, as they sat together watching their children play in the garden, both William and Catherine found themselves looking at their royal life with new eyes. The fairy tale of seamlessly joining a loving family had been replaced by the more complex reality of navigating relationships where love, duty, and power intersected in sometimes painful ways. The Cambridge lover's knot tiara remained in its case in Catherine's dressing room, its diamonds catching the light whenever she opened the velvet box. But, now it represented more than just Diana's memory or royal tradition, it had become a symbol of their family's determination to maintain their dignity and protect their children, regardless of the cost. As for Camilla, the queen consort learned that her position carried influence and respect, but not the unlimited power she had assumed. The monarchy's strength, as William had reminded his father, came from its values and traditions, not from the ability to bully and manipulate those who seemed vulnerable. The royal family moved forward, presenting a united front to the public while privately nursing the wounds that would take years to heal. But William and Catherine had emerged from the crisis stronger and more united, having learned that sometimes the greatest threats come from within, and that protecting what matters most requires courage that goes far beyond what any protocol manual could teach.